Welcome to Empathy Stories, where the power of resilience and the beauty of the human spirit come alive through heartfelt narratives. Today, we'll journey into the story of Madison, a woman whose life was shattered by betrayal but rebuilt through courage, kindness, and an unexpected gift. Stay tuned for a tale of redemption, legacy, and triumph over adversity. Madison sat in her aging sedan, rain drumming incessantly against the windshield, her fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Across the street loomed the Grant family mansion, its towering columns and ornate iron gates stark against the gray, stormy sky. It had been 2 years since she had last seen this house, 2 years since her life had unraveled. Now, she was back, summoned by an unexpected letter. Though every fiber of her being told her to turn the key and drive away. She glanced at the invitation on the passenger seat, its elegant envelope bearing the embossed crest of the Grant family. It felt surreal. For 2 years, Madison had been reduced to a shadow of her former self, a far cry from the hopeful young woman who once believed in love, loyalty, and forever. Her husband, Bradley, had shattered those beliefs, leaving her not only brokenhearted, but completely destitute. When she had married Bradley, she thought she had stepped into a fairy tale. Bradley was charismatic, ambitious, and came from one of the wealthiest families in the country. For a small-town school teacher like Madison, their whirlwind romance felt like a dream. At first, life with him was thrilling, lavish parties, exotic vacations, and an ease of living she had never known. But as time went on, the cracks began to show. Bradley's charm was a facade, masking a cold and self-serving man who valued status over substance. Madison, with her modest upbringing and simple kindness, never fit into his world or his family's. The Grants, a family of power and privilege, treated her with a mix of condescension and thinly veiled disdain. They saw her as an outsider, someone unworthy of their name. Madison endured it for years, clinging to the hope that Bradley's love would be enough to bridge the divide. But she was wrong. When Bradley announced he was leaving her for Cassandra, a younger, glamorous socialite, Madison was blindsided. He didn't just abandon her. He and his family made sure she was left with nothing. The divorce was swift, ruthless, and entirely one-sided. Madison had no money, no home, and no support. She was cast out like she had never belonged. Life after Bradley was a daily struggle. Madison moved into a tiny, rundown studio apartment and took on extra teaching jobs to scrape by. Nights were spent grading papers at her kitchen table, her stomach often empty because she couldn't afford more than a cup of soup. There were moments when despair threatened to overwhelm her. But Madison refused to break. The betrayal had hardened her, instilling in her a quiet resolve. She would survive, even if it meant starting over from nothing. Now, sitting in the car outside the mansion, Madison's mind raced. The invitation to William Grant's reading had caught her completely off guard. William, Bradley's father, had always been a reserved and distant man. At family gatherings, he had barely spoken to her, his stern demeanor giving away little. Yet Madison had sensed something beneath his rigid exterior. A flicker of disapproval toward Bradley's arrogance and cruelty. Still, she had never expected him to acknowledge her, let alone include her in something as significant as his will. The mansion seemed larger and colder than she remembered, its imposing structure a reminder of all she had lost. With a deep breath, Madison opened the car door and stepped into the rain. Her clothes were soaked within seconds, but she didn't care. She had faced storms far more punishing than this one. As she approached the grand entrance, her heart pounded in her chest. She felt like an imposter, returning to a world that had rejected her. The butler, a severe man who had always treated Madison with thinly veiled contempt, opened the door before she could knock. Without a word, he ushered her inside. The familiar scent of polished wood, expensive cologne, and freshly cut flowers hit her like a wave, bringing back memories she had worked hard to bury. She followed the butler down the hall, each step heavier than the last. When Madison entered the study, the room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned to her, and the air grew thick with tension. Bradley was there, of course, standing by the window with Cassandra by his side. His arm rested casually around her waist, a picture of smug confidence. The sight of them together made Madison's chest tighten, but she quickly masked her emotions. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her pain. "What are you doing here?" Bradley's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and incredulous. He stepped forward, his expression a mix of disbelief and annoyance. "I was invited," Madison replied, holding up the envelope as proof. Her voice was steady, though her heart threatened to betray her resolve with its rapid pounding. Cassandra's lips curled into a smirk. "This is a private family matter," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Before Madison could respond, the family lawyer, a composed man with silver hair, intervened. "Madison is here because she is listed as a beneficiary in Mr. William Grant's will," he announced, his voice calm yet commanding. The room erupted into chaos. Bradley's face turned red with fury, and Cassandra looked as though she'd been slapped. The other relatives whispered among themselves, their shocked gazes darting between Madison and the lawyer. Amid the uproar, Madison stood silently, her head held high. She didn't know what to make of this unexpected turn of events. But one thing was certain: her presence here was about to change everything. The tension in the room was palpable. Madison could feel the weight of every stare as the family lawyer calmly opened the thick leather-bound folder containing William Grant's will. Bradley, still standing near the window, clenched his fists, his fury barely contained. Cassandra's expression oscillated between disbelief and disdain, her perfectly sculpted features betraying her outrage. The other relatives, some seated and some standing, exchanged hushed whispers, their gazes darting back and forth between the lawyer and Madison. Before his passing, Mr. William Grant made several amendments to his will. The lawyer began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. These changes were made in private, without influence from any family members. As his legal counsel, I can confirm that all decisions reflected his explicit wishes. Bradley scoffed, stepping forward. "Let's not waste time. Whatever trivial item he left her, let's get it over with. We all know who the real heirs are." The lawyer raised a brow, but didn't respond to Bradley's taunt. Instead, he turned his attention back to the will. "Madison Grant is listed as a direct beneficiary," he continued. "Mr. Grant has left her the entirety of the Grant Vineyard estate and all associated assets." The room erupted into chaos. Gasps of disbelief filled the air, followed by sharp protests. Bradley's face turned an alarming shade of crimson, and Cassandra's jaw dropped, her carefully composed demeanor shattering. "This is ridiculous," Bradley bellowed, slamming his hand on the edge of the desk. "The vineyard? That's the heart of our family's legacy. He wouldn't leave it to her. She's an outsider, divorced. No less." The lawyer remained unperturbed, his tone calm but firm. "Mr. Grant's will is legally binding. If you wish to contest it, you are welcome to do so in court. However, I should warn you that your father was meticulous in his preparations. Any challenge will likely fail." Madison stood frozen, her mind racing as the lawyer's words sank in. She hadn't come expecting anything of significance, perhaps a token gesture or acknowledgement. But not this. The Grant Vineyard wasn't just another property. It was the jewel of the Grant family's empire, renowned for producing some of the finest wines in the country. It was a symbol of their wealth and power. And now, it belonged to her. She stole a glance at Bradley, whose fury had given way to frustration. It was a rare sight, seeing the man who had once held so much control over her life rendered powerless. For the first time in years, Madison felt a spark of empowerment, though it was tempered by a swirl of confusion and unease. Why had William chosen her? What had she ever done to earn such an extraordinary inheritance? "You can't possibly expect us to accept this," Bradley snarled, turning back to the lawyer. His voice rose, desperate now. "She doesn't know the first thing about managing a vineyard. This estate will crumble in her hands." "Your father believed otherwise," the lawyer replied evenly. flipping through the pages of the will. In his own words, he found Madison to embody the qualities he wished to preserve in his legacy: kindness, resilience, and integrity. Madison's breath hitched at the words. Kindness? Integrity? For years, she had been dismissed by this family, treated as an intruder, a burden. To hear that William had seen something in her, a value that transcended the materialistic world the Grants inhabited, left her both humbled and deeply moved. Kindness? Cassandra scoffed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what he called her manipulation? This has to be some kind of scheme. Enough! The lawyer's voice rose slightly, silencing the room. Mr. William Grant's intentions are clear. Any further disputes can be addressed through legal channels. Bradley turned to Madison, his eyes narrowing into a glare. This isn't over, he hissed, his voice low but laced with menace. You don't have what it takes to handle this. Sell it to me and save yourself the embarrassment. Madison lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with a calm resolve that surprised even her. I'm not selling, she said firmly. Your father trusted me with this, and I intend to honor that trust. Her words hung in the air, a quiet declaration that carried more weight than the shouting match that had preceded it. Bradley's glare deepened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stormed out of the study, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Cassandra followed in his wake, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The remaining family members avoided Madison's gaze as they filed out of the room one by one, their whispered remarks barely audible but unmistakably bitter. When the last of them had gone, Madison found herself alone with the lawyer. He handed her a set of keys and a folder containing the official documents transferring ownership of the vineyard. Mr. Grant wanted you to have this, he said, his tone softening. He believed you were the right person to carry on the legacy. Madison nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted the folder. She glanced down at the keys, their weight feeling heavier than she anticipated. The magnitude of what had just happened began to settle over her like a thick fog. As she left the mansion, the rain had eased, but the storm inside her continued to rage. Questions swirled in her mind, each one more pressing than the last. Why had William bypassed his own son to leave her something so monumental? What had he seen in her that she had never seen in herself? And most importantly, could she rise to the challenge of managing the vineyard? A task she had never imagined taking on? Back in her car, Madison clutched the folder tightly, her heart pounding as she stared at the mansion's silhouette through the misted windshield. For years, she had been made to feel small, invisible, unworthy. But today, William Grant had given her something she never thought she'd find in this place: a sense of purpose. What that purpose would mean, however, remained to be seen. Madison sat in her modest sedan, staring out at the sprawling vineyard that now belonged to her. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills, the rows of grapevines stretching endlessly into the horizon. The Grant vineyard was beautiful, but its grandeur felt overwhelming. She clutched the keys William Grant had entrusted to her, her hands trembling as she stepped out of the car. It wasn't long before a tall man with salt and pepper hair approached her. His sun-weathered face and steady gaze carried an air of quiet authority. You must be Madison, he said, extending a calloused hand. I'm Daniel Evans, the vineyard manager. I worked closely with Mr. Grant for years. Madison hesitated before shaking his hand, her voice soft but steady. It's nice to meet you, Daniel. I have a lot to learn, so I hope you'll be patient with me. Daniel gave a small smile. Mr. Grant spoke highly of you, he said, surprising Madison. He told me you were kind and resilient, the kind of person this place needs. He believed you'd take care of it the way he always hoped it would be cared for. His words brought a lump to her throat. For years, Madison had felt invisible, discarded by Bradley and overlooked by his family. To hear that William had not only noticed her, but believed in her left her both humbled and determined. Daniel led her through the vineyard, explaining its history and operations as workers moved methodically through the fields. Madison listened intently, her mind racing with the enormity of the task ahead. She wasn't a businesswoman or a winemaker. She was a schoolteacher, someone who had spent her life nurturing young minds, not managing an estate. But as she walked through the vineyard, she began to feel a quiet resolve building within her. She would figure this out. She had to. Over the following weeks, Madison immersed herself in the vineyard's operations. She pored over William's meticulous records late into the night, learning everything she could about the business. Daniel proved to be an invaluable ally, patiently answering her questions and guiding her through the complexities of vineyard management. The workers, initially skeptical of her ability to lead, began to warm to her. Madison treated them with respect, asking for their input and genuinely listening to their advice. Slowly but surely, she earned their trust. But not everyone was ready to accept her newfound role. 2 weeks after she took ownership of the vineyard, Bradley arrived unannounced. Madison was in the study, sorting through William's papers, when she heard his voice echo down the hall. "This is absurd." Bradley stormed into the room, his face flushed with anger. "The vineyard belongs to me. My father had no right to leave it to you." Madison stood, her heart pounding, but her expression calm. "Your father had every right," she said firmly, "and he made his wishes clear." Bradley scoffed, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You're a schoolteacher. Madison, what do you know about running a vineyard? Sell it to me and save yourself the trouble." Madison crossed her arms, her voice steady. "I'm not selling. Bradley, your father trusted me with this vineyard, and I intend to honor that trust." Bradley's eyes narrowed, his tone turning menacing. "Don't be stupid, Madison. You're going to ruin everything." "That's not your concern," she shot back. "Now, if you have nothing else to say, I suggest you leave. I have work to do." For a moment, Bradley looked as though he might explode, but then he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Madison sank into the chair, her heart racing. She had stood up to Bradley, something she never thought she'd be able to do, and for the first time in years, she felt truly free. Despite Bradley's threats, Madison pressed on. With Daniel's help, she introduced sustainable farming practices and expanded the vineyard's distribution network. The workers rallied behind her, their respect for her growing as she proved herself capable and committed. The vineyard began to thrive, earning recognition for its innovative approaches and high-quality wines. Madison's transformation didn't go unnoticed. One day, she received a call from a prominent magazine requesting an interview. At first, she was hesitant, reluctant to relive the painful memories of her past. But Daniel encouraged her, reminding her that her story was one of resilience and triumph, a story worth sharing. The article was published a month later, accompanied by a photograph of Madison standing among the grapevines, the sun setting behind her. The headline read, "From Betrayal to Triumph: How One Woman Turned Heartbreak into a Thriving Legacy." The story detailed her journey, from being abandoned by Bradley to inheriting the vineyard and transforming it into a success. It included excerpts from William's letters, highlighting his admiration for her character and the reasons he entrusted her with his legacy. The article resonated with readers, drawing widespread attention to Madison's strength and perseverance. Bradley, however, was furious. The article painted him as the antagonist, and public ridicule soon followed. His carefully crafted image crumbled, and Cassandra, his new wife, left him, taking what little remained of his dwindling fortune. Madison, on the other hand, flourished. The vineyard became not just a business, but a sanctuary, a place where she found purpose and belonging. As she walked through the vineyard one crisp autumn evening, watching the workers harvest the grapes, she felt a profound sense of peace. William's letters had given her more than an inheritance. They had given her clarity, purpose, and the strength to rebuild her life. She had been cast out and dismissed, but she had risen above the betrayal, proving to herself and the world that she was far more than anyone had ever given her credit for. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Madison's story, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the rewards of integrity and perseverance. If you were inspired by her triumph, please like, share, and subscribe to Empathy Stories for more uplifting tales. Share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know how this story resonated with you. Until next time, remember, every challenge can lead to a brighter tomorrow.